It is vlog 182, and it is October, the month of the PEPPERMILL PokerPALOOZA. I'm fired up for it and hoping a lot of you are going to be heading out here to take part. We're giving away a seat in that main event on the final weekend of it, and we're going to be giving it to the person who brings the best question or comment to this vlog. And we'll read some of the finalists coming up at the end of today's vlog. Also, I don't think I've ever been more excited to hear the Crush Live Poker podcast than I am this coming week, because there, of course, was the scandal that rocked the poker world. Was it cheating? Was it not? If you're watching this vlog, you obviously know what I'm talking about. And my guy, Bart Hansen, was the man on the call for that scandal when it happened. And I cannot wait to hear his take on this when that podcast drops on Tuesday. So if you're not already subscribed to that, I think it's the best place to go for live poker trading that exists. You can always click the link in the description below for 25% off a basic or premium subscription for life. Let's head over to PEPPERMILL and play some poker. After dropping off my son at preschool, I show up early on a Thursday morning to record an interview with poker director Mike Nelson about the upcoming PokerPALOOZA, which you can watch on this channel. We ended up talking as much about cash games as we did the tournaments, in all honesty, so if you want to watch that, go ahead and take a look at it. After a short wait, I do get into a 5-10 game on table 1, buying in for $1,000. We get a $35 raise over a hijack straddle, and I make a loose call with 7-8 offsuit in the low jack. This is obviously not a good play, but let's just say it was very player dependent in a couple of spots, and I wanted to get involved with these guys. With 105 in, the flop was indeed slightly above average. In this game today was a guy who used to be kind of a regular in our game, but hasn't played much in recent years. And he's undoubtedly the most famous player in Reno poker history. And if you want to look at his handiwork, here you go.
And that is it. Ankle lock. Ken Shamrock. Shamrock does it. He had the ankle.
That's Ken Shamrock, MMA legend known as the world's most dangerous man. And by the way, he could not possibly be a nicer guy. Anyway, after I flopped this straight, he led right out into me for 60, and I just call to want to keep the hijack in this hand as well. I do end up accomplishing that goal, and with 285 in, the turn comes a 4. Shamrock leads out for 125 here, and I figured that it would be still advantageous to me to keep the other player in. And sure enough, that happens. So with 660 in, the river is a jack, and now Ken shuts down. I had to think about sizing here, and ultimately decided to bet a little under half the pot, making it 300. And that apparently was still way too much, as both of these guys basically snap-folded that river. I lose back a few small pots, and then raise to 40 MP2 with a decent pre-flop holding, and end up getting 3 callers. With 160 in, the flop is 10-6 deuce with 2 spades, and I bet 100. Local legend, Mr. Z, 2 to my right, is the only caller here under the gun 1. So with 360 in, the turn is another deuce, and he ends up check folding to my bet. One orbit later, I picked up the same hand, which I wasn't all that upset about. This time it comes on the button, and I raise to 40, which results in the big blind and an under the gun limper calling. And with 130 in, the flop comes jack 6-4 with 2 diamonds, and it gets checked to me. I bet 110. The big blind calls, and the limper folds. So with 350 in, the turn is the king of clubs. The big blind now leads out for 250 here. Raising to me seemed a bit thin with just one pair, though an argument can definitely be made for it. But in this case, I decided to just call. And with 850 in, the river is the 3 of clubs. And now, he checks. So the idea of him having king-jack here, I think has pretty much gone out the window. Some players will still slow down here now that a possible flush comes in with 2 pair, but I didn't figure this was one of them. So my read was that he probably had a king with a diamond draw that had missed, and calling out of the big blind, chances are his king wasn't all that great. So I needed to size way down to get paid off here, I figured, and I made it 150. He still thought about it for a long time, given the size of the bet to the size of the pot, knowing he was probably beat, and he pays off anyway, showing Indeed, just the king of diamonds. So, aces were treating me nicely, but as it turns out, and some of you may not know this, I actually just found it out myself, well, they're hard to get. So in this next hand, well, I just had to settle for this lousy hand 2 notches worse than it. I just can't catch anything today. I open +1 to 35 here. The button defends his straddle, and the big blind completes. With 105 in, the flop is king, queen, 6, 2 spades, giving me middle set. Big blind checks. I bet 60, and the button is my only caller. With 225 in, the turn gives me 2 pair. A pair of red queens in my hand, and a pair of black queens on the board. I look to check raise here, and I end up getting a $100 bet out of the button, who is one of the most sporadic poker players you'll ever see. I honestly don't know what goes on in his mind sometimes, but I do know this. If he has a king, he's not folding to my check raise. And if he has a flush draw, he's probably not folding to the check raise either. So that's what I do. I make it 300, and it was pretty clear that he didn't have either one of those 2 things, as he folded instantly. So I don't get paid off, but I do get $300 in bonus tax refunds with the high hand of the hour and a 4 of a kind payout. A few orbits pass, and I won and lost a few small pots, and when in the straddle, this is going to shock you, I picked up the 8 deuce. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's 39% of the time you straddle, you get 8 deuce, not 38. I got to work on that exact number. Then a revolting development occurs. Mr. Z gets brutally coolered by a grinder who has been around a lot lately and shows up with a backpack, watching TV on an iPad the entire day while waiting for hands. And he should take this as a compliment, but he's basically the last guy I'd want to see get quad kings against Mr. Z's aces full. Something that I think would qualify as a bad beat in LA card rooms, which is exactly what happened here. And unfortunately for Mr. Z, no bonus. In this next hand, I had to assume he'd be steaming. I know that I would be if that had happened to me. Under the gun opens to 45 and +1 calls. I'm an MP1 with 9-10 of diamonds and make the call, and Mr. Z comes in from the hijack. So with 185 in, the flop would prove that I am officially sun running. First 2 guys check, and I elect to slow play this bad boy. The hijack bets out for 75 with the other 2 guys folding. I smooth call here, planning on leading out on the turn. With 335 in, that card is the king of hearts. I decide to bet out for 85 here, thinking that he'd view it as a blocker bet and would raise. He thinks about it for a minute, but doesn't raise. He just calls. With 505 in, the river is a 4. I really wasn't sure how strong he was here. I was thinking that he probably had some sort of made hand, as he probably would have raised my small bet on the turn if he had just had a draw. I just didn't think the made hand was nearly as strong as it proved to ultimately be. So I just bet 200 here, and he doesn't think very long at all and decides to just call. Clearly, his decision was between raising and calling, not calling and folding. But we did have a $905 pot, which I win against Queen Jack. Definitely a spot where my usual policy of looking to get paid off by a wider range of hands results in me making a lot less money, but I won't bitch. I then would have continued running insanely hot if I had called a 1/6 pot-sized bet with pocket tens on an ace-high flop, but I figured the guy had to have tens beat after making it 90 pre-flop, and that ended up being correct. He had pocket kings, and he was betting small because he was scared of the ace on the board. As it turned out, I would have drilled a set of tens on the turn and filled up on the river in a spot where he may have paid me off anyway. Hard to know. A little bit later on, under the gun limps, and I make it 40. I'm in the cutoff with pocket eights. The button is an unknown older gentleman who I don't know, and he makes the call, as does the limper, the man who refers to himself as a hippie. With 125 in, the flop is king 6 deuce rainbow. Under the gun checks, and I decide to bet 45 here. Both of these guys call me. With 260 in, the turn is another king. Pretty good card for me. Thought about going for some more thin value here, but due to the fact that the guy on my left was an unknown, I decided against it. The good news was he decided to check, and we saw the river for free, and it comes a 5. Now the hippie under the gun bets out for 100, and I think this is an obvious call, knowing him as I do. I just had to hope the other guy wasn't going to call or raise behind me here, and that didn't happen. So we have a $460 pot, and he shows 8-6 offsuit for just a pair of sixes. Not quite sure what he was trying to accomplish with that bet, but our pocket 8s take it down. I won a small pot and straddled again, and you'll never believe what I had when I straddled. Shock, I know. There was then actually a moment where I felt bad for that grinder who I mentioned earlier, though, as you'll see later on in this vlog, my sympathies would dissipate. But in this hand, he decided to bluff catch the hippie for 600 on the river, and when he called, the hippie said, I just got 5s. So this grinder guy turns over 10s, and the hippie then turns over 5-3 for a straight. I'm recording this the day after I shot the vlog, and I still can't decide whether or not he was doing that as a pure bluff or actually knew what he had and wanted to see what called him. I honestly cannot decide. This is a mid-session update. I have decided, after careful deliberation, that running really good sucks a lot less than running really bad. This is the end of the update. I then raised ace-10 of diamonds and got an ace-high of flop, which I ended up betting the whole way with the button calling me, but it came running hearts, and he ended up jamming all in for what gave me a pretty good price to call, but I still opted to let it go. I then won a small pot, and of course had the winner's straddle as a result, and yep, you guessed it, a deuce. The aforementioned hippie then asks me if I knew a former Reno news anchor that was as big of a deal as a guy in Reno News is capable of being. I said I knew of him, but had never met him. And he said that he would play poker, but only so he could spend his winnings on cocaine. Much like that hand he had just won, I wasn't sure what I believed. I then picked up kings, and despite an ace-high board, I won a small pot off local favorite Dave B., which isn't always easy to do. I could have won even more off him had I not folded my pocket 9s in a 3-bet pot that came 10-7-6. The turn came an 8, and the river a 10, with queen 10 beating pocket aces after I'd already mucked. I then chased a draw in a spot where I probably shouldn't have, though I was getting a good price on it. And it would have been an ideal spot to have hit, as one player had ace-king, the other had ace-queen on an ace-high board with ace-king, obviously, taking it down. Have you ever had a hand where you think the river card is an action killer, but in reality it's the single best card that could come for you? Well, take a look at this hand. It happened when I was in the straddle in the cutoff and the button just called. With 25 in, the flop came Jack 7-4 rainbow. I bet out for 15 with the open-ended draw, and the button calls. With 55 in, and the way I'm running today, you know that I drilled this straight on the turn. It came the 8 of hearts. I bet out for basically full pot, making it 50, and he thinks about it for a minute and calls. So with 155 in, the river is the 10 of hearts, which I thought would definitely hurt my action, so I bet a little bit less than I normally would. I make it 75, and he decides to call, giving us a $305 pot, and I win against pocket 10s for a rivered set. Now, I think he was actually distracted by a texting conversation pre-flop, and that's why he didn't raise then, which worked to my benefit. Noticing things like that is often a very valuable tool when it comes to live intangibles in poker. Mr. Z had long gone over to the 10-20 game, but he walked over and wanted to sweat a hand of mine, and sure enough, I then had the pocket 10s, which I 3-bet to 100 and got called en route to an ace-high flop. And out of all the possible developments that could have happened at this point, the last one that I ever expected was for me to bet flop, get called, bet turn as well, which is what I did, and get a stronger hand to fold. But that ended up happening as pocket queens hit the muck. So that was a surprise, as were these white uniforms of the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday Night Football. What the hell's going on there? That grinder I mentioned earlier seemed to have a very good strategy. Play very few hands, either have quad kings when your opponent has aces full, or, as you'll see, unfortunately, for the aforementioned Dave B., have a set of kings when your opponent has a set of jacks, which is what happened here. He did, though, get $40 of it back from me a little bit later when he bluffed me off bottom pair and showed the skinny. So the session would wind down. Unlike most Thursday nights, the game really didn't get much better as the night went on. It may have actually been at its best right around noon, which is kind of a weird thing. Though, it was still arguably better than the 10-20 game that was going on table 5, a game that I once again opted to not jump into, and given the result today, wasn't all that upset about. All right, wrapping up an 8-hour shift here and booking a win of $1,828. Obviously ran insanely good. Very disappointed in myself for not making more in that hand with 9-10 on the flopped full house against the straight on the turn. Kind of surprised he didn't raise there, but maybe he sniffed it out. Knew that I probably had a monster there. So definitely that was the low light for me by not maximizing, but what can I do? Not going to complain on such a good day here at Peppermill. All right, so the way this is going to work, I'm giving a seat to the $880 main event at the Peppermill PokerPALOOZA, coming up on the final weekend of that tournament series, which wraps up on the 31st of October. And I'm giving that seat to the person who brings the best question or comment to this vlog. I want to get some viewer interaction as a result, and you must be a subscriber to win. Make sure you take note of that, so hit that subscribe button. The way it's going to work is if you write a comment below, I will write finalist on it if you are a finalist, and if you are then able to come to Reno for the main event, put your email address in there as a reply to me saying finalist, and I will then contact you about that. So let's take a look at some of the finalists so far, and you can go either question or comment. Dizzy writes in, my wife is thinking of leaving me because of my obsession with poker, but I think she's bluffing. Chan writes in, I'll be playing the all-in or full tournament, felting people with the skinny. If you successfully work the skinny into a comment, you're just always going to have a place in my heart. So Deuce 3, a very famed hand when you come to Reno, Nevada. And for God's sakes, don't refer to it by any other nickname than the skinny. David Thomas decided to go with a question, and it made him a finalist by asking, do you anticipate teaching your son how to play poker? If so, at what age? Or in the alternative, will you counsel your son to not play poker to avoid the angst and agony that poker often brings? Chances are, and I'm not really sure, but I don't think I'm going to do either of those things. I think that the way it would go for me is he would really have to prove to me that he was genuinely interested in it and that he was willing to put in the work required of being a winning player. And if he was able to convince me that he was willing to do those things, then I could potentially consider teaching him, but only under the condition that he wasn't going to give up a job to do it. I think that would be the way that I'd handle that. I wouldn't seek it out. He would have to come to me for me to actually teach him. But I also would not say that, no, under no circumstances would I possibly consider teaching you how to play. There's no way I'm going to do that. So I wouldn't go that way either. I think it's the best way to answer that question. Kind of along those same lines, Shane Clark asks a question that some of you who are new to the vlog may have been curious about. He writes, do you love your job so much that you have ruled out completely playing poker and vlogging full time? You have amazing content, and it's very evident that you love creating content for YouTube. So is there ever going to be a run at full-time poker? And it's certainly something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last decade or so. But I don't want to do it. I am lucky enough to have a job that I do enjoy. For those of you who don't know, I am the weekend anchor at our ABC affiliate in Reno, and I anchor the weekends and report on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I do really like anchoring and producing the weekend shows, but I don't love being a reporter on Mondays and Tuesdays at all. If I could, I'd probably just get rid of those shifts and just work the weekends, but that's not going to go over well if I ask for that. So I'm kind of stuck with doing that. The good news is we have a new GM and a new news director there that make me like the job so much more, because they're both great, I think. So that's been kind of the good news of late. Obviously, I don't need the job to get by money-wise, but I do enjoy doing it, and it prevents me from having to just be all poker all the time. It gives me some balance in my life, which, at least for the time being, I really do appreciate. And then ACD7 writes in with a question that really got me thinking and made him a finalist for that. Of all the living poker legends, who would be most gratifying for you to whip at a cash game? And that really had me thinking. And I really struggled to narrow it down to just one guy. But the guys who I would probably pick are Phil Hellmuth, because his behavior is just abhorrent at so many occasions. Beating up on him would be phenomenal. Mike the Mouth Matiso, and I guess to use the term legend when describing him is just a gross misuse of the term, but he's famous, so I'm dropping him in there. And then Doyle. I would very much like to absolutely win a large pot off of Doyle Brunson if I could in a cash game. That would be phenomenal too. So if I had to pick, that's the direction I'm going. A good question, good questions, good comments all. Those guys, all finalists that I just mentioned, to win the $880 main event seat for the PEPPERMILL Poker Palooza. You can slide into the comments now. You must be a subscriber to win. And best comment / question is going to get that seat, but you must be able to get out here to Reno to actually play in the main event if you're going to try to win it, obviously. And the rest of you, I encourage you, go ahead and book your stay ahead of time anyway. Get out here for the PEPPERMILL Poker Palooza. It's going to be 10 days of phenomenal cash game and tournament action. 20% off your room at PEPPERMILL with promo code DEECH. Use the link in the description below. Hit the like and subscribe buttons. Follow me on Instagram at Ben Deech, and I will see you back here next time.